imagining how the day would unfold. But what I couldn't have known was that this would be the day that my entire world would turn upside down. The morning started off normal enough. My dad, ever the perfectionist, was in charge of breakfast as usual. He was flipping pancakes, making sure the eggs were cooked just right. My mom, always the peacekeeper, set the table, and I could hear my little sister running around, doing her best to get ready for the big day. We all sat down at the table to eat together. And for a brief moment, everything felt right. As we ate, there was the usual playful banter. My dad telling stories of when I was younger, trying to make me laugh. And my mom reminding him to watch his dad jokes. It was supposed to be a joyful time, but somewhere along the way, something shifted. I don't even remember what triggered it. A comment I made about a gift or maybe a simple question about family plans. But suddenly, the tone changed. My dad's face hardened, and I saw a shift in his eyes, something I had never seen before. His voice, once warm and comforting, became cold and cutting. The words that came out of his mouth were like daggers, piercing straight to my heart. "I wish you were never born." The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. Surely this couldn't be happening. It was my birthday, my day to feel loved and cherished, not torn down. But as I looked at him, the coldness in his eyes confirmed that I had heard him right. It was like a punch to the gut, so unexpected, so unprovoked. How could my dad say that? How could someone who was supposed to be my protector, my guiding figure, speak to me like that? In that moment, time seemed to stop. My heart raced and a lump formed in my throat. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. The hurt was instantaneous, but so was the confusion. Why would he say something like that? What did I do to deserve such cruel words? My mind spiraled, replaying everything I thought I knew about my relationship with him. Was I not enough for him? Was I truly a burden to him? The rest of the breakfast was a blur. I remember sitting there, staring at my plate, feeling both numb and overwhelmed with emotion. My mom, noticing the tension, tried to intervene, but the damage had already been done. My dad's words echoed in my mind, and no amount of distraction could make it go away. What was supposed to be a special day, a day where I felt loved and valued, had been marred by rejection. And in that instant, my relationship with my father felt like it had been irrevocably broken. I didn't know how to move forward from this. I didn't know how to go on with my life after hearing those words from the person I had always looked up to. But little did I know, this was just the beginning. What came next would change me in ways I never could have predicted. The birthday that started with joy would soon become the catalyst for a journey of self-discovery, healing, and strength. And while my dad's words stung deeply, they were also the spark I needed to find my true worth. The moment my father spoke those words, "I wish you were never born," the world seemed to shift beneath my feet. In that instant, I felt as though the very foundation of everything I had ever known was crumbling. It wasn't just the shock of hearing such cruelty from him, it was the deep sense of betrayal, the hollow realization that someone who had been my protector, my guide, could now wish for my non-existence. It was a wound that would take much longer to heal than I could have ever imagined. At first, the hurt was almost unbearable. There are few things more painful than hearing something so deeply personal from someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally. The words reverberated in my mind, echoing long after they were spoken, and I found myself paralyzed by the weight of what they meant. How had we gone from sharing birthdays filled with love and laughter to this? How had the relationship I once cherished become tainted with such hatred? What hurt most wasn't just the words themselves, but the implications of them. For years, I had worked so hard to please my father, to be the daughter he would be proud of. I sacrificed parts of myself, my own desires, my own needs, in order to earn his love. Every decision I made was filtered through the lens of how it would affect him, how it would make him see me. I wanted him to see me as strong, as capable, as someone who was worth loving and respecting. I thought that by doing everything right, by being the perfect daughter, I would finally feel validated. But in that one moment, all of it crumbled. His words made it clear. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would never be enough for him. I would never be worthy of his approval. The pain of that realization was like a jagged knife, cutting through everything I thought I knew about myself. It wasn't just the sting of his words. It was the deep, gnawing pain of being seen as a burden, someone whose existence was a mistake in his eyes. I remember staring at him, my mind racing for a response, but I was at a loss for words. How do you respond to someone who says something like that? How do you fix a relationship that has been so deeply broken? I had always turned to him for guidance, for support, for love. But now, in this moment, I felt utterly alone. It felt like he had torn away a part of me, leaving behind only a raw, empty space. In the days that followed, the hurt didn't subside. Every time I closed my eyes, his words replayed over and over in my head. It was like a loop, a constant reminder of the rejection I felt. It wasn't just about the hurt of the moment. It was about the realization that everything I had ever known about our relationship was suddenly in question. Was he always this way? Had I been blind to his true feelings all along? Was I really just a disappointment to him, as his words implied? I couldn't bring myself to speak to him after that. I couldn't even look at him. Every time I saw him, the pain resurfaced. It wasn't just the relationship that felt fractured, it was my sense of self. For so long, I had tied my worth to his opinion of me. Now that he had rejected me so completely, I didn't know where I fit in the world. The person I had been for so many years, the daughter, the one who lived to make him proud, seemed to have disappeared in an instant. I didn't know who I was anymore. The wound he had caused was deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the emotional sting of his words. It was the sense of unworthiness, the feeling that I wasn't deserving of love or respect, not even from my own father. It was the fear that if the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally could turn on me so easily, then maybe no one else could truly love me either. But as the days passed, something started to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I began to realize that his words, while deeply painful, didn't have to define me. Yes, they had caused a wound that would take time to heal, but I began to see that I was not defined by his rejection. I was not defined by his anger or his cruelty. I was more than the pain he had caused me. The process of healing wasn't quick. It took time to understand that the person I had been wasn't the person I was meant to be. I started to unravel the parts of myself that had been molded by trying to gain his approval. I started to see that I didn't need to prove myself to him or anyone else. I was worthy of love and respect, not because of what I did or didn't do, but because of who I was. The deep wound he had caused began to heal, not because of anything he did, but because I chose to take control of my own healing. I chose to redefine myself, to reclaim my worth. I wasn't just his daughter. I was my own person, capable of standing strong and living life on my own terms. It was a painful journey, but it was also one of the most liberating experiences of my life. His words may have hurt, but they no longer defined me. In the days and weeks that followed my father's cruel words, I found myself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions that seemed to have no escape. The initial shock of hearing him say, "I wish you were never born," was like a punch to the stomach, and I felt emotionally paralyzed. In those first few moments, I couldn't even fathom how to respond. How could the person who had been my protector, my role model, suddenly say something so heartless? How could the man I had spent my life seeking approval from turn around and reject me in such a profound way? The aftermath of those words wasn't something that disappeared the next day or the next week. It lingered, hanging over me like a dark cloud, and I found myself struggling to breathe under its weight. I was haunted by what he had said, unable to escape the feeling that something inside me had been broken beyond repair. The hurt wasn't just about the cruel words themselves. It was about the sense of abandonment they left behind. For years, I had worked so hard to earn my father's love, to make him proud, to be the daughter he could rely on. But in that moment, all of that seemed meaningless. His words stripped away any sense of security I had ever felt in my relationship with him. I began to question everything. Had my entire relationship with him been a lie? Was I really the person he had made me believe I was? Or was I just someone he tolerated, someone he could easily discard? I found myself asking questions I had never considered before. How could he have said that? And what did it mean for me, for my future, and for our family dynamic? These questions swirled in my mind, but there were no answers, no clarity, and no resolution. It was just pain, confusion, and deep uncertainty. The emotional toll of the aftermath was far-reaching. I felt like I had lost a part of myself, the part of me that had always relied on my father's approval. I had always believed that if I just did things right, if I was good enough, he would love me the way I had always wanted. But now, that belief was shattered. I felt utterly alone, as if the person I had always turned to for comfort and reassurance had turned against me. It was hard to focus on anything else. I went through the motions of my everyday life, but inside, I was falling apart. I couldn't look at him the same way. Every interaction was filled with a painful tension. How could I go on pretending that everything was okay when I felt so deeply wounded? The days turned into weeks, and I started to retreat into myself. I stopped reaching out to friends. I withdrew from my family. I couldn't find the words to explain the pain I was feeling, even though I knew they were concerned. I didn't know how to talk about what had happened, or how to process the hurt. I had always prided myself on being strong, but in the aftermath of my father's words, I felt vulnerable in a way I never had before. I didn't want to be seen as weak, as someone who couldn't handle their emotions. But every time I tried to push through the pain, it felt like the weight only got heavier. It was during this time of isolation that I began to experience something unexpected, a slow but growing sense of clarity. I started to see that, while the wound my father had inflicted was deep and real, it didn't have to define me. His rejection didn't have to shape the person I was becoming. The hurt I was feeling was valid. It wasn't something I could just ignore or brush off. But I started to realize that I couldn't stay in this place of pain forever. It wasn't just about the anger or the sadness. It was about taking back control of my life and not allowing his words to dictate my future. The turning point came when I finally had a breakthrough during a quiet moment alone. I was sitting in my room, trying to hold back tears, when I realized something that would change everything. I was more than the words my father had spoken. I was more than the pain, more than the rejection. I was still me, strong, capable, and worthy of love. It wasn't easy to see that in the midst of the hurt, but it was the first step toward healing. I started to focus on self-care and self-compassion. I allowed myself to feel the pain, to grieve, but I also began to take steps to reclaim my own sense of worth. I started talking to people who loved me, who saw me for who I truly was, not just as the daughter of my father, but as my own person. I sought therapy to help me process the emotional wreckage I was carrying and to understand the deep-rooted patterns in my relationship with my father that had led to this point. Slowly, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been lost in the years of seeking his approval. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But over time, I started to heal. I began to realize that while my father's words had hurt me deeply, they did not have the power to destroy me. I had the strength within me to rise above this pain, to redefine my life on my own terms, and to rebuild a sense of self-worth that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. The aftermath of my father's words was painful, but it became the catalyst for my personal transformation. I learned to put myself first, to stop seeking validation from others, and to recognize that my value didn't come from how others saw me. It came from within. And while my relationship with my father may never be the same, I learned that the most important relationship I could have was with myself. After my father's cruel words, "I wish you were never born," a shift began to take place within me that I never expected. At first, I was consumed by pain, disbelief, and a deep sense of loss. But as the weeks passed, something started to change. His words, which had initially felt like a wound that would never heal, began to serve as a turning point in my life, a catalyst that would ultimately change everything. What my father didn't know, and what I didn't realize at the time, was that his rejection would push me toward a path of personal growth, self-empowerment, and ultimately, healing. At the time, all I could see was the hurt. I was consumed by the idea that my father, the person I had loved and trusted most, had rejected me so fully. His words had cut through me like a blade, leaving a scar that felt impossible to repair. I questioned everything: my worth, my relationship with him, and even the meaning of my life. How could someone I thought loved me so much wish I had never been born? It was a question that I carried with me for weeks, unsure of how to process or understand it. But what my father didn't know was that, in the aftermath of his words, I began to discover a part of myself that had been buried for so long. For years, I had based my self-worth on the approval of others, particularly him. I had always tried to be the perfect daughter, doing everything right, seeking his validation, and striving to be what I thought he wanted. In my pursuit of his love, I had lost touch with the person I was beneath the surface. I had neglected my own needs and desires in the hope that, one day, he would see me as enough. But after that moment, after the crushing blow of his rejection, I realized something powerful. I had been living for him, not for me. His words, though painful, forced me to confront this truth. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of someone else's expectations. The life I had been trying to build around his approval was not truly mine to claim. It wasn't about me at all. And while it took time to fully understand it, I came to see that in that moment of pain, I had the opportunity to take control of my own story. What my father didn't know was that by tearing me down, he was inadvertently freeing me. For the first time, I had the chance to redefine myself, to reclaim my life from the weight of his expectations. I didn't need to seek his approval anymore. The value of my existence wasn't tied to whether or not he accepted me. It was rooted in my own sense of self-worth, in my own identity. The more I reflected on the situation, the more I realized that my father's cruelty wasn't about me at all. It was about his own struggles, his own bitterness, and his own pain. He had been projecting his unresolved issues onto me, and I had absorbed it all, internalizing the idea that I wasn't enough. But I was more than his rejection. I was more than his harsh words. I was more than the person he saw me as in that moment. I was someone with dreams, aspirations, and a future that was mine to create. His inability to love me as I had hoped didn't diminish who I was. It illuminated the power I had to take back control of my own life. And so, the real work began. It wasn't about mending my relationship with him, at least not in the way I had imagined. It was about mending my relationship with myself. I started to prioritize my own well-being, my happiness, and my personal growth. I began to take the time to do things for myself, things I had put off for years in favor of trying to meet his expectations. I sought therapy to work through the emotional pain and rebuild my self-esteem. I reconnected with friends who loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. And most importantly, I began to love myself again. The more I focused on healing, the more I realized that his rejection had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced me to face the deep-seated insecurities I had been carrying with me, and to challenge the beliefs that had held me back for so long. It pushed me toward a more authentic version of myself, one that didn't rely on validation from anyone else. His words were painful, but in the long run, they helped me understand the most important truth of all. I didn't need his approval to be worthy. I was worthy simply because I existed, simply because I was me. What my father didn't know was that, in his moment of cruelty, he had unknowingly helped me unlock a strength I didn't know I had. His rejection became the catalyst for my transformation, a journey that led me to rediscover my worth and my purpose. The life I was building was mine, free from the weight of expectations, free from the need for validation, and free from the fear of rejection. His words, though they had once broken me, had ultimately freed me to become the person I was always meant to be. In the end, his cruelty was not the final chapter of our story. It was simply the beginning of my journey toward healing, self-discovery, and empowerment. And though I still carry the scars from that moment, they are no longer symbols of pain. They are reminders of my strength, my resilience, and my ability to rise above. When my father said, "I wish you were never born," it felt like my entire world shattered. I had spent years striving to make him proud, to be the perfect daughter in his eyes. And yet, in a single moment, all of that came crashing down. But what he didn't know, what I didn't even know at the time, was that his words were not the end of something. They were the beginning of a journey I never expected. His cruelty forced me to confront everything I had been avoiding, and in doing so, it gave me the courage to begin a new chapter of my life, one that would lead me to strength, self-love, and empowerment. The immediate aftermath was crushing. In the days that followed, I found myself numb, lost in a fog of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't understand how the man who had raised me, who had been a significant part of my life, could say such a hurtful thing. I felt completely blindsided, emotionally devastated, and utterly broken. I couldn't understand what had led to this moment. What had I done? Was I not enough for him? Did he truly see me as a burden? For weeks, I carried the weight of his words with me, unsure of how to cope. I withdrew from everything, family, friends, activities. I couldn't bring myself to face anyone. I felt like I had lost not just my father's love, but a part of myself as well. For so long, I had based my identity around being the good daughter, the one who always tried to meet his expectations. And now, in one devastating moment, I felt like I had lost everything. But then something shifted inside me. Slowly, I began to recognize that I couldn't stay trapped in this place of emotional paralysis. I realized that I had spent so much of my life defining myself through my relationship with my father, but his words showed me that my worth wasn't tied to him or anyone else. For the first time, I realized that I had the power to change the narrative. I had the power to take control of my own life, my own happiness, and my own sense of self-worth. What my father didn't know was that, in that moment, he had unwittingly given me the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to reclaim my own life. His words, though deeply hurtful, pushed me to confront the parts of myself that I had long neglected. I had always sought his approval, believing that it would give me a sense of validation and love. But in truth, I had neglected my own needs, my own desires, and my own dreams. I had built my entire sense of self on the foundation of what I thought he wanted me to be. But now, I realized that I couldn't continue down that path. I had to rebuild, and I had to do it on my terms. The turning point came when I made the decision to stop seeking his approval, to stop living in the shadow of his expectations. I began to focus on myself, something I had neglected for so long. I started doing things that made me happy, things that had nothing to do with him or anyone else's expectations. I rediscovered my passions, things I had abandoned in the pursuit of being the perfect daughter. I took time to reflect on what I truly wanted from life, separate from anyone else's influence. I sought therapy to help me work through the emotional pain and to gain clarity on the patterns in my relationship with my father. Therapy gave me the tools to understand that his rejection wasn't about me. It was about his own struggles, his own issues, and his inability to express love in a healthy way. And while that didn't excuse his behavior, it helped me begin to detach from the need for his approval. With time, I began to rebuild my sense of self. I stopped measuring my worth by the standards set by others, including my father. I realized that I was worthy of love, respect, and happiness simply because I existed. His words no longer had the power to define me. They had tried to break me, but instead, they became the catalyst for my growth. I began to feel more confident, more at peace with myself. I was no longer living to please someone else. I was living for myself. The journey wasn't easy, and there were days when I still felt the sting of his words. But I began to see them differently, not as a permanent wound, but as a wake-up call that set me on the path to healing. I found strength in the process of reclaiming my own life. I started making decisions that aligned with my true self, even if they disappointed my father. I no longer feared rejection because I had learned to accept and love myself. What my father didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his rejection would be the turning point I needed to become the person I was always meant to be. His words didn't break me. They gave me the courage to break free from the emotional chains I had been carrying. They forced me to confront my deepest fears and allowed me to step into a new version of myself, one that was strong, independent, and self-loving. In the end, his cruelty became the turning point for my transformation. And while our relationship may never be the same, I know that I am now empowered in ways I never imagined. I am no longer defined by his rejection. I am defined by my own strength, my own journey, and my own ability to rise above the pain and build a future that is mine and mine alone. If you've ever faced rejection or hurt from someone you loved, I want to hear from you. How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. Let's support each other as we navigate through life's toughest moments. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us all that we have the strength to overcome anything. Remember, no matter what anyone says, your worth is never up for debate. It's already inside you.